Hey everybody, welcome to the live stream. Another one of my live streams where I talk about the global talent visa. This is actually an unusual one because I won't be just talking about the UK global talent visa. I will actually be talking about the talent visa for the UK and also Australia, which is really cool. And I've never done a live stream like this. So, for people who are just joining us live, first of all, do let us know in the comments where you're joining us from, what you do for a living, and also would you like to move to the UK or Australia? Whether you're sure or maybe you're not sure, just let us know. So we'll be curious to hear whether you will become convinced or change your opinion towards the end. So, and also be active in chat. It's really nice to have people interacting. It's not so awkward for us, for me and my guest. And also, it does help YouTube and also LinkedIn to discover this live stream. So yeah, uh, let's see. Let's say hi. Okay, somebody's saying hello, everyone. So I assume you can hear me, you can see me, and yeah, thank you so much for joining. So I know that a lot of people signed up for this live stream on LinkedIn, which is amazing. I think over 700 people, which I've never seen before in my experience of doing those streams. So I assume a lot of people are joining who have never seen me, who have no idea who I am. So a little bit of an intro. So I am Nadia. I am a software engineer, self-taught software engineer. I'm also a DevRel. Currently work at Intercom. I'm based in London, and I'm a UK Global Talent Visa recipient. So I have this visa. I received it last year, and I'm also a UK Global Talent Visa coach, which means that I help talented IT professionals like you increase your chances of getting endorsed for the UK Global Talent Visa. And here on YouTube and on LinkedIn, if you're watching me on LinkedIn, I interview people who went through the process of getting endorsed for this visa in the hopes of learning from them and getting you inspired and informed so that you can apply for this visa as well and move to the UK. So, in terms of how you can keep in touch with me, kind of follow along, I'll share some links in the chat. Um, just a second. Oh, the links don't work. Sorry. Okay, one second. Okay, so first of all, there is my website where you can see all the services that I offer and how I can help you increase your chances for getting endorsed. And also, if you are not following me on YouTube, you should, because this is, I think, a much easier place to stay in touch and also to receive notifications about the stuff that I'm doing. So this is me on YouTube at Little Hope, and this is generally my link on all the different social networks. So if you're interested in the topic of moving to the UK, I do suggest that you give me a follow. So once you do that, also like the stream on YouTube. Again, this helps the YouTube algorithms this help others discover my channel and my content as well. So that was the housekeeping. And now I'm really excited to actually introduce our guest today. Just give me one second. Let me. Hey, Maryleen,
Hey,
welcome.
hey, hi,
Hey,
hi
yeah.
everyone.
Thank you so much for joining. I'll do a little bit of an intro. So our guest today is a data scientist and AI solutions architect who helps companies get the most out of their data. She covers the full data solutions lifecycle from research to strategy, model building, and workforce upskilling. And also, Maryland is a talent coach, which is very exciting. So she helps people start or advance their tech careers. And also, she assists in visa migration for exceptional talent. So actually, Maryland also helps people with the UK Global Talent Visa, but also with the Australian Global Talent Visa and the American Talent Visas, the All-One Visa. So Maryland kind of does it all. So it's very exciting because I'm also very interested in obviously helping people migrate, but also talent coaching is something that is very close to my heart as well, since I do some career coaching as well. So it's really nice to talk to you today. Thank you so much for joining.
Yeah, thank you, and thanks everyone for joining. I can see like lots of responses on LinkedIn and just, you know, seeing all the
Yeah,
shout outs and intros. Yeah.
amazing. Yeah, you are a rock star, Marilyn. I've never had that many people sign up, so you clearly have a large following. So I guess a lot of your fans are joining. So if you, let us know in the chat again. A lot of people are actually commenting, which is nice. Making introductions, getting to know each other, all great. So just to have a look at the chat. Some people are saying that they would like to work either in the UK or Australia. So yeah, so somebody is in the UK but wants to go to the global talent visa. What
Yeah.
else?
So some
Yeah,
persons
so
they're just like they they've had a lot more about the UK and not much about
Yeah.
Australia, which yeah,
Yeah.
I do I understand why, and I'll talk about that as well. Yeah.
Yeah, 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 exactly. Like for me, I've done some research on the Australian visa, but also the information is so limited on YouTube. And even me, like I'm interested in this topic, but I wasn't able to really, find that much. But also, like to be fair, I didn't do like a deeper research. But the purpose of today is actually to give people information about Australian program and also the UK program, so that you can actually compare them and understand what fits your interest better, which program is better, like what Australia is for you, maybe the UK is a better fit, and generally just compare what is easier, what is harder, and like what is the visa, which visa basically is better. I think this is why I call those things visa battles. I actually had one where we compared the American talent visa, the O1 visa, versus the UK global talent visa. I think UK
Yeah,
global
yeah,
talent visa.
I saw that one and it was really
Yeah.
nice. Yeah.
Yeah, so in that case, actually, the UK won, kind of. So I wonder which one will win in this case. And also, when if you're listening to this live, let us know in the chat whether you're getting convinced towards one or another, or whether you changed your mind. I think it would be really interesting if somebody was like, "Okay, I'm going to the UK," and after this stream, they're like, "Okay, well, I'm going to Australia." So, so to start. Could you tell us a little bit about yourself, where you're from originally, what you do for a living, what is your professional background?
Yeah, so I'm from Nigeria, proudly Nigerian, and so I came to the UK 6 years ago, and before then, I studied electrical electronics engineering, but then I wanted to go into tech, but it was very broad, like which area was I going to focus on, and that was the big question mark for me. But then I started like attending some conferences, and that was where I, you know, came across IoT, Internet of Things, as a technology, and I thought about, focusing on how to extract the insights that come from big data, which connected me to the data science and AI side of that. Like, because all the millions of devices that are going to be connected, you'd have all that data coming through, and it kind of got me thinking about extracting the data. But then when I came to the UK, I did my master's, and then I went on to do my PhD. And in that research space, I was working on like designing AI machine learning algorithms that would be deployed on the edge. So edge is like, you have an IoT system, and I don't want to go too technical, but you deploy that and then it begins to work close to where the data is being generated. Yeah, so that's like my space. And of course, during that period as well, from 2018, that was when the vision of, even before then, the vision of Scholarly was really like to help connecting people to opportunities, because I saw how I, as a migrant, was looking out for those opportunities. I didn't have like so much information out there, and people to guide me. There were a few people that I was able to reach out to, but I thought of like how to help more people, and that was how the whole coaching side of it came about, because I helped a lot of people who had like migration issues, and yeah, that's on my website displayed. So it started off like blogging, coaching people, organizing boot camps to kind of help people connect them to different opportunities from education to career. Yeah, so that's been, I'm very passionate about talent, skilling, digital capacity building, and there are lots of opportunities out there. But sometimes the challenge is like how people can connect to those opportunities, especially in the migration space as we have it now. And
Mhm.
yeah, I mean, various countries. If you look at Canada, the US, the UK, Australia, one thing you're going to see common among their strategy is like how to bridge this skills gap. And you see that among many organizations as well, bridging the skills gap, and the whole that's where the whole vision of global talents, exceptional talent, and extraordinary ability visas came about. So how do you find these people, and how do you attract them and bring them in and help them settle?
Yeah, so yeah, that sounds very interesting. I'm personally very interested in talent and helping talented people as well. So kind of more, my focus has mostly been before helping people enter IT who aren't technical. So because I'm a career switcher myself, and then it kind of moved over to helping talented people migrate and just fulfill their full potential in the UK. So I think that we do work that is similar in kind of in similar vein. So so it's really nice to connect and chat here. So you mentioned that you moved to the UK. So can you tell us a little bit about the visa kind of journey, how you came here, on what kind of visa, and when did you switch to the talent visa here in the UK?
Yeah, so I came on student visa, and I actually came with a scholarship, a scholarship from my government, so from the government agency back at home. And from that point, I wanted to also further my studies, so I focused on looking for opportunities to do my research. Of course, I didn't want to, spend money doing my PhD, paying fees, because I thought, yeah, well, it's almost like working for the university somehow, and I would love to get a scholarship for that. That was when I spent a lot of time applying for scholarships. I talk a lot about PhD opportunities and scholarships in data science, AI, and machine learning space, and share lots about like those kind of opportunities as well. So I got a scholarship for. Interestingly, I got a scholarship for a university in Australia, so that was actually how the Australia connection started, right?
Yeah.
And I got in the UK as well, but then I had to make a choice for the
Ah,
UK. But I
okay.
still, yeah, I still like had that Australian um, desire at the back of my mind anyway, like at
Yeah.
that migration plan somewhere hidden somewhere at the back.
Yeah.
And yeah, so I within that 3 4 years, I was doing my research here in the UK, and it was at some point, I just started coming across some information about some other kind of visa, like the talent visa, and I tell you, the very first time I saw that, I was just like, no, this is not for me. I'm nowhere near what these people are asking for. I'm nowhere near exceptional talent. So I disqualified myself. I was like, no, I just would pass this. But again, it came back, and that was when I started digging further into it to learn more about it and start talking to people as well, to kind of understand that space. The thing about the tech nation visa, particularly the one for digital technology, is that for people with my kind of background, it doesn't look very obvious. Like it doesn't shout out, "This is for you,"
Mm.
because I'm coming from the research background. And so somehow that was like my contemplation. Is this really for me? And I actually thought maybe some other routes, like some other endorsing bodies, like the engineering Royal Academy of Engineering, might even be better suited because of the research focus. And for that would have meant that I would wait till the completion of my PhD to apply for that. But then after some looking and browsing and asking questions, I thought, okay, yeah, I think this is the right one for me, and I just went for it rather than waiting. So sometimes you just want to over engineer the whole thing
Mhm.
and like overthink
Mhm.
it, but at times it's just about like making that move. Like if you believe like you've got what it takes and you can meet the requirements. Yeah, so that was how I went from the student visa to the global talent. There was actually the option of getting the skilled worker visa. In fact, like it was because I was at the point where I was getting close to being kicked out of the UK because my visa was expiring. Yeah, so I was exploring those different options, but yeah, it could just came at that perfect time. And I thought, yeah, this
Yeah.
this visa is actually far better than the skilled worker, and I would just pursue it.
Mhm. Yeah, it's actually we were talking about before, kind of how do we approach the timeline of this interview? Like, do we start with the Australian one? Do we start with the UK one? And I was, thinking that maybe the Australian one would be a better start, but now I'm thinking that, kind of chronologically, I think it's better to start with the UK visa and how, you describe how you at first thought that this wasn't for you. Maybe you could share how did you decide actually to go for the Tech Nation endorsement? And for people who are new, Tech Nation is an endorsement body that endorses people who work in tech. So how did you decide to go for Tech Nation endorsement rather than the other, endorsement body that is more specific to research and kind of academic? So what was your thinking process like? I think this will be useful for people who are kind of on the fence whether they should go, the Tech Nation route or some different route.
Yeah, the thing when I look back at my profile, my experiences and background, I saw that some of the things that I had already been doing within the tech space, like the I did lots around, they have this criteria of like what you do outside your work, which was also difficult for me because my typical work was not like the industry work, like when you're employed and you're actually working with an organization, because most of the work I was doing was in research. So for me, I had to come to that understanding that outside what you do outside your work for me would be what I do outside my research, and most of that was, working with non-profits. So I did lots of non or outside work or outside typical work activities. And that, yeah, included volunteering or just maybe working with non-profits, NGOs and all that. So for me, that criteria was very easy to meet. Then the other criteria that had to do with research, it was quite difficult as well because I thought about, do I even have enough publications at that point, and do I even have to wait for my PhD to be completed? But then after much research and talking to a few persons, I decided, okay, yeah, I could actually meet this criteria, because a lot of what the application entails is having like the recommendations. You really need your network. I'm sure many people have talked about that. You really need your network. You need the right people to help you on that journey. So for someone that is in the research space, you're going to need people that like your advisors, people that you work with within that space. And so I had to pull all this network together. So those were the two that was strong in. There were criteria around if you were a founder or if you were an employee in an organization, and I knew that it might be difficult for me to meet those because I was not in the typical digital led or product led digital technology sector. So finding
Mhm.
those definitions, there were a lot of back and forth understanding, do I really meet this? But the main blocker I had for the other routes that were more research focused was I didn't have my PhD at that point. So that was, for me to even go for those ones, I could have had to wait. But with this kind of thing, sometimes you decide I don't need to really wait because you don't know what's going to happen like next 2 months. So just go for
Yeah.
it. Yeah, so I had
Yeah.
I had friends as well that went for the other routes, and they were like, "Oh, we already got our PhD and we just went for this route. So maybe you just have to wait to get your PhD to go for this route." But I knew like what the blockers would be to get to that point, and there were uncertainties around when exactly was going to happen. So I just thought if I could put everything I had together, I could actually meet this criteria. But there weren't so many people that looked like me in that application, even asking questions. But I had like at least one person I could use as an example. This person looked like me in profile, in background, experience, and not exactly because everyone's experience is unique, but I could at least that gave me that boost, that lift
Yeah.
to make the next move.
Yeah, I think that this resonates to me so much. I think that it's so important to see representation in this aspect as well, to see people who have very similar background to you. And this is kind of what motivated me to actually start interviewing people. And I will just paste the link to the YouTube again. So there you can actually find interviews where I talk to people from a variety of backgrounds. I interviewed a data scientist there who also had an academic background. So she also chose the academic optional criteria. So I think that for people who maybe have a similar background, this interview could be interesting and useful as well. In addition to the current one that we're doing. So. Can you clarify a little bit about the academic criteria? So you said that you wondered whether you have enough publications for it. And again, this is a common question, I think, for people. How much do I have to be endorsed? So maybe you can give us a little bit of an idea of that.
Yeah, so the for the academic criteria, the one of the key, because you need to look at what are the options. One, they specify that you would need someone, maybe like an expert, to endorse you in that field. And then they also mention that you need publications that are top tier publications, and maybe top tier. Some of these things are not defined, but you will know that these are the kind of things that they may be looking for based on what is the reputation of the journal, how many citations have you got, and how long, how recent is the publication is against. So, for example, if you publish something, let's say this last year, and it already gained 100 citations as against something that was published 5 years ago and just had like maybe 80 citations, right? So they will look at all those factors. So for me, in the academic criteria, so yeah, I've got some publications, but for a PhD students, right, I didn't have like those sort of very top tier kind of publications. I was working on them anyway. And I knew that I might not have them. In fact, when I was listing out my evidence, I was like, okay, I'm going to have this publication by so time. So probably I would wait till a few months to get that publication out of the way. But I'm glad I didn't do that. I'm glad I didn't make that decision. Then there were other things I'd done, like conferences, right? Because they mentioned there maybe conferences you've attended. So conferences are very good as well because it's a way to you're presenting your work before an audience. So I used those kind of evidence. Then awards as well. I had lots of awards. And again, question of what kind of awards could be used, right? I had awards like from things that I was doing during my PhD, some awards from the even the PhD scholarships that I got where I added them as evidence to my awards. Then I also got endorsement from an expert in the field, an advisor that which was
Mhm.
really very important for that criteria. Yeah, so those were really the key evidence I had. So for that one, I was able to fulfill it. And also just to mention as well, in the course of my PhD, like I said, I there were several things I was doing, and on the coaching side as well. When I speak to people, how do you optimize your time as a researcher? You know, it's an opportunity to even be flexible to like get some experiences. It could be internships, it could be working with an NGO, for example. It could be even working as a specialist for as a collaborator, like I did for an institution, a lab, right? So you bring in your expertise. Like for me, it was my AI expertise for this lab that was doing something related to agriculture. So those kind of things, and I also was a facilitator for a data science Turing Institute data study group. So those experiences, I didn't realize when I was doing all these things, I didn't realize that, oh, this could actually build up and serve as evidence one way or the other for this visa. But I was really grateful that in the course of my PhD, I didn't just bury my head in my research and just doing research. I was I was also looking out. I was that typical person in my undergrad, so I said no. That this is the I need to like build myself and prepare myself for the next stage of my career, and that's why I got
Mhm.
involved in these things. And I'm grateful that they all kind of added up. Even the evidence I used, some of them were like the work I did with a charity working on an AI project for kids, like writing a book that was used for secondary school students to disseminate and help disadvantaged students. So those kind of work that I was doing at different points, random points during my
Mhm.
research all came together, all added up to my evidence. And yeah, that's the thing. You might be doing even a lot, but the challenge some people have is where do I even start from? So at first, maybe there might be that imposter syndrome of I have nothing, I haven't really done anything until you begin to dig you begin to dig in and like really bring all those stuff out from wherever they were hiding three
Yeah.
years ago, 4 years ago, and so on. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, you just said that you don't have enough, but you thought that you didn't have enough, but you have been kind of just listing your achievements for, I don't know, 15 minutes already. So you clearly you clearly have done so much, and I think that your story is really inspiring. So I think that I had a pretty similar situation where I was really grateful when I was preparing my visa application, my case for the global talent visa, that I did some stuff beforehand that wasn't just coding, and that I also wrote and published a book a couple of years before that. That I also did like a little press tour with the book, so I went and gave some interviews about it, and those things, they really came so handy when I was gathering the documents. But yeah, it's very interesting how you presented your case and kind of how you came up with all the documents. I think another question that people always ask me is, how do you choose the experts who would give you the letters of recommendation? the the main letters, for instance, and how did you approach doing it? Because you have sort of not very standard kind of profile. Because again, I think the standard profile for this visa is a software engineer who works at Funk. So I think
Yeah.
there it's more or less clear, and
Or
I've
a
interviewed
founder.
yeah, a founder, yeah. So again, like I've interviewed a lot of people from Funk or founders on my channel, and I think that their stories are inspiring, and that they're different. Like each story is different. But I'm curious whether in your case you have some different tips for people who are in more of an academic world, and maybe they don't really have any connections kind of in the tech sector, or how would they approach getting the letters of recommendation for their situation, because like they don't have maybe a skip level manager, like people at the company have. So who should they approach, and maybe who did you approach?
Yeah, cool. So in my case, like, because just to give some context to those that are not aware, you're going to have three for the technician visa. You're going to have three letters of recommendation, which are the compulsory letters. But then part of your evidence in your within your evidence, other evidence you provide, you could also provide some letter of support. Maybe it could be like you were a speaker and you're getting a letter from the organizer of that event and things like that. So for the key ones, the three of them, two of them were actually from academia, but not from the same organization. One was from an organization that I was working with as, it's an NGO, so I played a key role there in like leading and organizing a lot of things and kind of setting the vision. So the other one was from my core academic activities, but you could see the variety there as well,
Mm-hmm.
in the evidence that I provided. And then the third was from industry, because it's also part of what they might be looking at as well. And there are different things they look at. I'm not saying this from the angle of, because you're going to be faced with different assessors, but they will be looking at that breadth of your exposure as well. So if you're bringing evidence from the same university, all three, in fact, all your letters are coming from the same university, it's going to, like, I think, be a red flag. Like, don't you know anyone outside this organization? So they're looking at, if you are a leader or promising talent, then you should have that network. You should have network of people that you know. Yeah. So
Mm-hmm.
the one that came from industry was even from a conference that I attended, and I connected from there. And LinkedIn even makes it easier these days, so you can build that connection, and from there that connection would start to grow. You can, like, there are different means, maybe even commenting on what people post, reaching out to them, and having like that, initiating those conversations from what you see from their posts. So, and that was how that third one came about. So I had like that breadth of connections from academia, from NGO, from industry. And that was how it was as well for other evidence that was spread out. So some coming from charities I work with, or coming from the data study group with Alan Turing, and so on. So it was really like, you could see like there were so many
Mm-hmm.
different, from different angles, different countries, some from US, some from Korea, some from the UK, some from Nigeria. So you could see like that breadth as well, in even in the countries. But this was all coming
Yeah.
from sometimes things I've done, and people have worked with, which you can connect from conferences, from engagements you have.
Yeah, it's always, network is so important. I think in this visa application process, it's just so obvious how important it is to have a network and to be on good terms with people and to know a lot of people. So I do hope that the story encourages people who are maybe more shy or introverted and who don't really pay attention to build a network. I do hope that maybe this inspires them to build a network because it's so valuable, and you can achieve much more actually in life if you invest in building those weak connections outside of your kind of strong connections and your friends and family. I think it's very important, and a lot of people don't really appreciate why it is important. So I do hope that this is helpful. So I do actually thought that maybe we can take questions kind of as they come, because then we'll switch to the Australian one, and it will just be very confusing. So we had a question here. So I have a similar background with you, Maryleen. Wanted to know what your mandatory criteria was when you applied decided your publications. So I guess the question is what you used to fulfill your mandatory criteria, outside of your awards and your publications, right?
Okay, let me see if I can remember. So one was yeah, I used speaking because I had like lots of speaking, not lots like lots, but I had a number of speaking engagements, and yeah, I was able to use one of those for my mandatory criteria, which is very useful because that actually shows one that you're an expert in the field for you to be invited, and you should be like really projecting that. And it shows, yeah, that your work, you're contributing to the sector because you're either maybe enlightening people, training them, and so on.
Mhm.
Another one that I used was an award. I used an award that was like a regional award for that was recognizing tech, my tech contribution to the sector. I also used yeah the work like contribution to um, there was one that talked about how you've contributed to outside of your work, like leading an effort or growing, helping to grow an organization. So the NGO I talked about, or not for profit organization, the key role that I played there to actually help them grow. Then another one, which for academia. So out of all these ones I mentioned, I think this one, even for academia, it might be even easy to get speaking because you're going to be attending conferences. And another one would be judging the work of others, which some people actually even find that difficult outside academia, like because it's very niche based. But things like being invited to review some work as a reviewer, some top journals or conferences or workshops which I use. So I think I've mentioned five already.
Mm,
Yeah.
yeah, I think so. Yeah, so you get 10 maximum. So that's the maximum number of documents that you can upload. So, okay. So actually, if you're listening to this live and you have questions on the UK side of things, so maybe you can get them in now. We can go through them and then go to the other side of the world and talk about Australia.
Other side of
So
the
we,
world. I like that.
yeah, yeah. So we actually had, there was something else. Okay, so this one, let's answer this in terms of the UK. So is it just for those in tech, and can other people benefit from it as well?
Yeah, so like there are different endorsing bodies for the global talent visa. In fact, global talent visa generally is about they're looking for exceptional talents or people with the extraordinary ability in certain fields that will come in to contribute, or they're already here that would actually advance the sector, or whichever sector it is, tech or other sectors. So, but usually the countries would have, and this is typical as well for Australia. Sorry, I'm I'm beginning to compare now. I can't
Okay,
help it.
I,
I
I
can't
just
help
I
it.
just warn I just want to warn people to not get confused. But
Okay,
yes.
okay, yeah, yeah. Okay, so for the UK, and for the UK government, they have selected certain areas like to focus on to attract these talents. One of them is tech, which is digital technology. There's also the arts. There is um, the sciences and engineering. Was there any other one? The humanities and science, I think they are
Mm-hmm.
grouped together.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and then there is engineering. So I can't remember, was there medical and health? But I think there are four or five. So for each of these, they have like their criteria that needs to be met. So digital technology is just one of them. But what's typical about some others, like the the one on engineering and maybe the humanities and sciences, is that it's very like research heavy in their evidence. So they might be asking for publication or some awards that are typical of academia, or they may be asking for, maybe a PhD or like a research experience or some your work or employment in research, that research space. So that's what kind of makes that quite like
Mm-hmm.
different from
Yeah.
the tech one.
Yeah, so from everything that I've heard, the tech visa is actually easier to get in terms of requirements, and it might be more open to people from outside the academic space, which is, I think, very relevant for a lot of programmers who are self-taught, for instance, like me. So it might be easier, but also if you have a different background, I do encourage you to research on whether you can qualify for this visa in a different field. There was another question from Daniel about letters of recommendation. And yes, the answer is that your experts can be outside the UK. So there is no discrimination in terms of origins when it comes to letters. So people often assume, I think, that they have to be from the UK for the Tech Nation visa. It's not a requirement, but it's different, right? For some of the other endorsement bodies, from what I've heard about the Arts Council, I think, uh, or not. Am I talking crazy? Do you remember?
I don't remember. I
Okay,
don't
yeah.
remember.
So just ignore it and forget I said it and just Google for yourself. But I think that there is something there that you need to be endorsed by, for artists, for instance, that you need to be endorsed by a body or an expert who is based in the UK. So you can double check that. But for Tech Nation visa, if you're in tech, don't worry, it's not necessary. You can just use your connections in your country of choice. Okay, so what else? There was a question about the NGO. The NGO must be tech related or any NGO. I guess it was about related to your some of your comments, right, about NGOs.
Yeah, so it must be tech related. It must be a contribution you're making to the digital technology sector, particularly for this technician visa. So whatever organization, it would be an organization that is advancing the digital technology sector. So in terms of whether it's tech related or not, the key question is, are they your work? Is it advancing the sector?
Yeah.
Digital technology sector. Yeah, so that's like the key.
Mm-hmm.
If you can say yes to that, I can
Mm-hmm.
justify that, then yeah, it's
Yeah, I think a lot of people get confused here because they have some volunteering that they do for a very noble cause, but that isn't connected to tech at all. So I think this is um, kind of admirable, but it's not really applicable in terms of this visa, unfortunately. So make sure that your volunteering or corporations are related to organizations that are advanced in the field of tech, which is kind of a quote from the Tech Nation Visa Guide. So we're just following kind of their guidance. Okay, there is a question about the 10, the maximum. So no, you don't have to upload 10 documents, but I think in my experience, in the experience of my clients, people try to upload the maximum number of documents because the space is there, and if you have enough documents, you can upload 10, but you don't have to. Um, it's up to you. I don't know what your experience has been. Do people try to upload 10, or uh, do you kind of what was your approach in terms of numbers? Did you try to go for the maximum?
yeah for me the because and the 10 documents kind of tricky because there is 10 piece of evidence maximum, but then you there are other documents that you need to upload as well, like your CV. I think there's a separate space for CV
Yeah.
and recommendation, right? Like the three
Hmm.
LOR,
Yeah.
like letters of recommendation. So that already brings it to 14.
Hmm.
So in terms of piece of evidence, they should be like 3 pages maximum and 10 piece of evidence max. And I'll just go with that. That's because
Yeah.
that's what it's giving the guideline.
Yeah, there's also the personal statement, so it's 15 documents kind of top together. So
Personal
if
statement.
all of them are, yeah, so if it's like 3 pages each, so it's 45 pages for documents, which I think always shocks people because sometimes people think that this process is so easy, and then they learn how much actually is how much work is
Yeah.
involved and like how much writing there is. Which kind of reminds me to ask you whether like what was the process of doing all of this for you? Like how much time did it take you to prepare everything? How long did it take you? Like, how difficult was it for you?
Yeah, like I it was actually end of January that I actually started gathering because there were different phases for me. There was phase one of gathering the info, all the like the information that I needed, which is very important because if you don't do that and you just go straight to putting together the evidence, it's that's like the strategy parts, right? Like um getting the info, being strategic and working on that part. Then the active gathering of the evidence, the writing and organizing. So that's like the second phase for me. And everything, like if I put together, because you I have other stuff doing during that time as well. So it would be roughly 2 months. Took me roughly 2 months to go through the whole process.
Hmm. Yeah, I think it's kind of I think average what it takes people 2 3 months sometimes. I've heard of people doing it in like 2 weeks, but it was just locking themselves up in a cottage somewhere and just writing nonstop.
Mhm.
I think that realistically, if you have a job or other
Yeah,
commitments, then it will take you longer. And I think that if you do
yeah,
it on your own, or
for
with a
sure.
coach or with a consultant, I think it takes about the same time. So it is an intense process. It feels like a second job, I think, almost. So yeah,
Yeah,
just
it's
to
really
be
thorough,
mentally
very
prepared.
intense. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, but you have to remember everything about yourself, like the last 5 years of your life. You have to dig up like all the achievements, publications, everything that you have done,
Like
and
you
sometimes
become
you
an
have to get
investigator.
yes, yeah, you investigate your own past. You Google yourself in like different languages, and you try to find publication like mentions of you, which I think is it's intense, but also I think it's really like okay, fun might be like a strong word, and like for me it was kind of fun at times, but for a lot of people it will be tedious. But I think it's useful. You investigate your own career, you see the strong points, kind of the weak points, and analyze it. So uh, I think it's
Yeah,
interesting.
for
Okay, there was
me,
yeah.
for me in that process, I was like, oh wow, it actually made me realize it's like, is this me? When you're investigating, I'm like, oh, okay, that's me. And it also helped me think about the future as well. Like, okay, so these areas, I don't have this, so maybe I could be more strategic to do this kind of things, which would be really nice, like for my career goals and all. So it helped me understand what are the kind of things that experts out there would be interested in, or even countries like they're interested in you and they want to see
Hmm.
the evidence that you are a talent or you're exceptional. So it was really
Yeah.
like very for me very thorough and good experience.
Did you also have this moment when you were like, when you finish writing your own documents and you like reread it and you're like, oh, I'm not that bad. Like I have done some stuff. I think it's really
Yeah,
good for
yeah. It
for
makes
your
you
self-esteem.
feel yeah, exactly. It makes you feel it boosts your confidence like wow, I've
Mm.
got all this, you know, and I've really done a lot and makes gives you something to be proud of really.
Yeah, yeah. It's kind of like a retrospective of your own career or your skills and everything. I think that it really gives a lot of confidence. And I hear from people who do this that then it becomes easier for them to switch jobs and maybe start a business, and they just are more confident about themselves. This is certainly what happened for me, because I kind of switched roles as well, and I started more content and kind of coaching as well. So it really did help. So, and glad to hear that your kind of experience was similar. Did you feel that just so you switched from the student visa to the global talent visa in the UK, right?
Yeah.
Did you see that anything changed in the way you feel while you're living in the UK? Because a lot of people talk about feeling more stable, more calm about their future, and just more confident. Did you have something like this?
Definitely. Like for someone that had been on a student visa and because you're under a sponsor, you'd have to meet some obligations of that sponsor. I felt liberated for sure. And I remember when my uni was like, "Oh, your visa is expiring, so can you tell us what's happening with your visa status?" I was like, "I'm now on a global talent visa. Here it is, and you can now leave me alone. I can write." Yeah, so it was really liberating for me. Like the fact that I imagine contrasting that to maybe skilled worker visa when like you are attached to a sponsor and whatever
Mhm.
conditions tied to that sponsorship. You have to keep to it. So it was liberating, like coming from that sponsored visa down to one that's like more liberating and
Yeah.
you have like, more flexibility.
Yeah, you sponsor this visa. This is the visa that you sponsor for yourself. You're your own sponsor, which I think is incredible. And people, even when they get it, they sometimes write to me and they're like, "Okay, so are you sure that I don't need anything like to live in the UK? I don't need anyone's like permission or sponsorship." And I'm like, "This is the point of you making this switch, like to not need it. Don't worry." But I think people, it's interesting. Like I've never interviewed anybody who switched. Maybe I did actually, but we didn't go into detail. Like who switched from the student visa to the skilled worker visa. I usually get people who complain about how stressful the skilled worker visa was for them, especially now with the layoffs in the industry and just all of this happening. But also, I guess for students, it is a very similar situation. You have a sponsor and they are expecting kind of, I guess, academic performance, right, to maintain this visa, or what kind of the you mentioned some requirements and kind of expectations that they had from you. Is it related to your academic success, or is it kind of something different?
Yeah, for that, it depends on. So for someone that is on a master's, right, the requirement is more like those checking points. You would have to do some admin, maybe check-ins because of your visa, and that could be like filling out. So for PhD, you have a system where you have to fill out the regular meetings you have with your supervisor, because if you don't do that, it's going to they're going to flag it up, and maybe the home office will be coming for you in no time if you're not meeting those obligations, right? And if your visa is expiring, you have to like think of how to extend it, possibly if you're not done with your program. And so those sort of
Mm,
administrative things that kind of keep you on your toes as to, oh, what's next. And I've had some of my friends that were in this, even with their PhD, and they're on the student visa, and they have to think of maybe postponing, or not even postponing, like extending their visa over and over because they were not done with their PhD, and that has its own cost and
yeah.
stress and all that headache.
Yeah, yeah. So you can extend it, but as far as I know, and maybe you can correct me, the student visa years they don't really count towards the permanent residency, or do they?
They don't count like as a standalone visa, but
Yeah.
it can count like towards the long stay, which is like 10 years long
Mm-hmm.
stay, and that
Mm-hmm.
could be a combination of different visas as long as you've been here legally. I'm not
Yeah.
and I'm not an
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
immigration
Yeah. None of this is immigration advice, just kind of sharing experiences.
lawyer.
But yeah.
Yes.
Um,
So don't take my advice for it. Mm.
Yeah, sure. Cool. We also had another question about promise versus talent. Promise versus expert. No, it's promise versus talent. We're all experts, but some of with less experience. So yeah, could you share kind of which route did you apply for and were you endorsed for?
Yeah, I was endorsed for Promise, right? Because I looked at my tech career. Most of it had been studies, but then in between studies, doing some like tech activities, tech related activities. So I looked at that, the fact like I had um done, because I came to the UK, went from masters then to PhD, and then because of that PhD, I did some of those short term activities that added up to all
Mm-hmm.
the work I was doing. So it wasn't like I was in one company for 5 years. Although the company for me was the research, like being in the university and doing my PhD, right? So yeah, I went for Promise on
Mm-hmm.
that
Mm-hmm.
basis. Yeah.
But yeah, just to clarify, the only difference kind of with the promise or talent is how much time you need to spend until you apply for permanent residence. So 3 years versus 5. Other than that, it's kind of the same BRP card and the same visa. So
And this is just for tech nation visa, because
yeah.
for the other endorsing bodies, so even Promise, you can get your permanent residency after 3 years. So
Mm.
yeah, so this is just for tech nation visa. It's the three, they are the ones that make the distinction for Promise and talent between 3 and 5. Or for other ones, you can actually even choose like from 3 years. You can, if you want to, choose 3, 4, 5, depending as well on your dependents. Because that was like a different ball game. You have to think of, do you want to apply for permanent residency all at the same time? So you have that flexibility to choose from 3 to 5 years, how when you want your ILR to be due. So
Hmm.
that's like, for the others, it's not that different. It's just you can get that
Hmm.
even sooner.
Yeah. There was another one about recent graduates. Can recent graduates apply for the global talent visa, or do you need to have some years of work experience? So I guess this is also kind of related to promise and talent, and in general, like how should people approach it if they are recently graduated?
Okay, good. So, and it that question depends on recently graduated from what, right?
Hmm.
And for me, I'm like a recent graduate, but I was
Hmm.
doing my PhD, and depends on what were you doing in the course of your study. And some persons went in to do, let's say, masters, but they have some years of work experience. By the way, like the technician would be looking at your last 5 years, what you were doing. So your evidence have to be around like the past 5 years, even if you're a talent, like you've been in that field 20 years ago and you've been working. Of course, you have to put all that experience in your CV, and it would show in your profile, but your evidence have to fall within the past 5 years, right? So if you're a recent graduate, what were you doing before you graduated and even while you were doing your studies? Because not everyone just maybe went from bachelor's to master's straight. Some people were, even while they were doing their masters, they were maybe founding a company or doing something on the side, right? And they were hitting it big during that time. Or some people, even from their doing their PhD, their research, they had to spin off a company from their research, from the work and lab work they did. Yes, so it all depends on what you were doing. Is that tied to that endorsing body, let's say technician, for example, and is that significant enough, like to build up your evidence and your case?
Yeah, I like the question. I like the answer that we give. It's always like it depends.
Yeah, there is no binary yes, one or zero. It depends. Yeah, and
Yeah,
that's
you
why
can. Yeah.
for me, in my experience, I remember filling out one of these forms that assess whether you are eligible for the application, and it said no, you're not. You're not
Yeah, yeah.
qualified. Or like, oh no. So, but yeah, here I am with the visa. So sometimes, and you have to be also careful. Those things could be good to guide you. What are they looking for? But every person's case is unique.
Mhm.
And that has to even show in your application. Every candidate is unique. And you're going to, when you're presenting yourself, being strategic on how you present your case, and the people assessing it will be looking at your case on an individual basis. They're not going to be saying, "Oh, Nadia is a dev, is a software engineer or dev, and she's a
Mhm.
researcher. So let's compare." No, everyone's case is unique, but you have to
Yeah.
prove that you are more like proving your case before them.
Yeah, I agree. And also, like, I've interviewed a couple of people who I think so. Somebody was told by kind of a bigger agency that they aren't eligible because they didn't check some check boxes, and then somebody I think also used one of those scoring. They're like scoring kind of things online where you can input your experience, and the website tells you, you're eligible or not. And I always warn my clients against kind of doing it. I mean, you can do it for information purposes, but don't treat it as kind of the verdict on you. And the same with the Technation Visa Forum, where people share their kind of their profiles and they ask the forum to say whether they are eligible or not. I think also it's very useful in terms of information, but I wouldn't really advise people to. use it as kind of determining whether they should apply or not. I think it's always better to talk to a coach or a volunteer or somebody who, a lawyer or somebody who understands this and get their expert take on whether you're eligible or not. So hopefully this helps. If you want to clarify this question and maybe give more details, we can get to it later. Okay, so people want numbers. So how many docs out of the 10 documents did you submit for the mandatory criteria?
Five. I think I mentioned five. Yeah, five. Think five, and then three and two for the optional. I can't remember how I arranged it, but I think it was five or four. But the ones I listed out earlier, they are the ones I submitted. And then the 10 documents, just to emphasize that it's 10, the 10 piece of evidence, not 10 documents, because you have like about 15 documents. In addition to the 10 piece of evidence, you have 3 letters of recommendation, you have the CV, and you have the personal statements. Yeah, which can either be a document or you just paste it on the box on the
Yeah.
application form. Yeah, so those are like 15 documents, 10 piece of evidence. Yeah.
Yeah, I think we are getting tired just talking about the documents, not to say to write them. It's a lot. Okay, so the another question was, is this available only for PhD holders or available for other degrees as well? I guess for people who, let's narrow this down to people who choose the academic criteria, the optional criteria for academic contributions. Can you meet this criteria without having a PhD? I guess you didn't have a PhD when you met it, right? Maybe,
Yeah. I
yeah.
didn't I didn't have a PhD, but I had research experience because on one of the, I think where they talk about publication, they would say this should not come from your MSc. So it shouldn't be like, oh, I did my MSc and the publication that came out of your master's thesis, you use that, right? It has to be some other activities, research activities that you've engaged in that would contribute to and advance the sector. So it
Mm,
is, yeah, it is not just for, you don't have to be a PhD holder. You need to have like research experience. You need to have people that can endorse you as an, people that are experts that can endorse you based on your research experience, that can write you a recommendation and say, yes, your research has either potential or it's a leading or cutting edge research in that field.
yeah. Hopefully this helps. Actually, we had a confirmation from Pauline. Thank you so much for Googling this. And yes, indeed, if you're applying for an arts and culture endorsement in the UK, you do need a recommendation from an organization from the UK. So I did remember correctly. So this is, I think, the example where you do need to have connections in the UK to do this, which I think makes it a little bit harder for a lot of people. But luckily for Tech Nation, you don't have to worry about it.
Yeah.
Uh, Cool. We had a question about being from working from product led and consulting as a senior product designer and strategist. Must the recommendation come from a C-level seat or a senior manager in product led? I think that on my channel, again, you can, if you watch the interviews with people who work in variety of skills, I had a couple of designers there as well. And if you listen to their stories, basically, the answer is no. A lot of people don't have access to C-level people in their organizations. Some people have access, but they choose to have somebody who is closer to their work. So it's not really a requirement. I know some people would say that it is, but also if you talk to real people who have the visa and kind of ask them real questions about their documents, it's not a requirement. So I do recommend you check out the interviews with other people on my channel to see that it's not a requirement at all. And if somebody tells you that you have to have a CEO of a company like Funk will sign you a letter, then just be very careful whether you take this advice or not. We had
Yeah.
a question about the. Sorry, yeah,
Just
go ahead.
on that, one thing that might be like a rule of thumb would be if this person applied for the global talent visa, would they be endorsed?
Hmm. Yeah,
Because sometimes they've rejected people on the basis that this person's profile doesn't even look like if they had applied, they would get it. And that's to say that they are not even qualified
yeah,
for the visa itself. So you can't be using someone who doesn't have that um, potential to get the visa, doesn't have the right background and qualifications to get the visa.
yeah. I think like the most amazing thing that you can do is actually ask somebody who has the visa the global talent visa to give you a letter of recommendation. But then you have to be really lucky to have them also know your work in detail for 12 months or more, and all of that. But like technically, this is kind of the person that they will never be able to say that they are not a leader because they already endorsed them. So this is kind of a sure thing, but I realize that this is very difficult. But I'm just saying, kind of talking from experience, because somebody from my clients actually told me that they know some people with the visa who could recommend them, which I think is kind of amazing. But also, I do encourage like listen to stories of real people who went through this, and you will hear that everybody worries about it so much, but then they get letters from their skip level managers, and it's totally fine. So I did it. I asked for a letter from my skip level manager, and it worked. So don't worry. But the person that you ask the letter from, they have to have some sort of profile. They have to be a leader in the space, basically. Um, cool. Okay, so we had a follow up about the NGO. So curious to hear your take on this. I built an app for an NGO religious community, and they're using the app to receive payments, which now has recorded over 1,000 users with significant reviews on the App Store. So, what do you think? Whether this would be something that you would submit as an evidence?
I wouldn't advise on evidence particularly because it's going to be on a case by case basis, and there are
Yeah.
other things that you need to ask, like what is the they're looking at. One, again, what would you channel this evidence to? You need to be strategic about it. Is it going to fall under the mandatory or optional criteria? Because what you would be using as evidence to justify might differ. But yeah, there are other things that you need to dig deeper into, like what's really been the impacts and of what you've built, and how can you justify that? What would be the significance? You know, that significance is not an answer. We can't tell you, myself and Nadia can tell you, oh, it's 2,000 citations, or oh, it's 10,000, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
these things are um maybe from people's experience we can say, oh, this is what significance might look like, right? But you cannot put a particular number to it, right? Because there's
Mm-hmm.
so many other factors. I usually tell people that when they're assessing your application, they're not looking at one single evidence and like, oh, because of just this one, you are a global talent. They're looking at just all your evidence, yourself as a person, your entire profile, and they're making their judgment based on all that you have, even what you have submitted and what is out there online. So you have to put all that factor,
Yeah.
you as that holistic candidate. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I like this question. So I also always advise people to look at all the evidences holistically and understand where it fits, and also it's you can use a lot of the evidences actually to support different criteria in terms of it all depends on how you present the evidence. So again, this is better decided on kind of a case by case basis. So I think it's like for these live streams, the better kind of candidates for questions are more generic ones, where we can give helpful information that helps everybody, I think, to think about it. There was another short question whether there is a specific period for application yearly. No, luckily, no. You can apply whenever you want. You can apply today or on the weekend, whatever. It's open, it's permissionless, there is no cap on how many people apply, and that's kind of why I'm promoting this visa so much, because it's so amazing.
Nadia, are we going to focus only on the UK? Because I
Yeah,
have
it's like an
something
hour.
I have
Okay,
something different to say for Australia
I
because
know, yes,
it's like
okay.
all the audience now wants, and for the way we are going, it's
Yes.
like everyone is just going to go to the UK now because they're
Yes,
not going to
okay.
know
Yes,
more
you're
about
right, you're right.
Australia.
But so many questions. It's your fault. You're so popular that many people came
Maybe
to
we're
ask
going
you
to have
questions.
another session then.
Yeah, okay, cool. Okay, let me just scroll. I think that mostly we've covered all of it. Let's switch kind of to the Australian one. So maybe a little bit of an kind of just a short intro. Like, how did you decide to apply for the Australian one? Like, why? You mentioned briefly, but many people just joined. So, what is kind of the reason you got the UK Global Talent Visa one, right? And then you decided to apply for the Australian one as well.
Yeah,
How
good
did this
one.
happen?
So,
What
well,
were you thinking about?
Anyway, it's the Australia dream. Like that I've had. Yeah, I mentioned earlier that I was actually very keen to migrate to Australia at the start. When I got my PhD scholarships, I got scholarship in Australia and the UK. So that's actually where that interest came about. And um, at some point, then after I got the UK one, I don't know how I stumbled. I can't remember how I stumbled on the UK or the Australian visa, and it looked in some way similar to the UK one. So I started to like dig deep and explore, and it's like, yeah, I think I can actually try this out, give this a shot. Yeah, so that was how that happened. Just the fact that from my background or from the past, I have had like that experience. I was very, very close to applying to actually even migrating to Australia back then. So I still had that
Mm,
interest in Australia. Yeah, and the fact
yeah,
that it's the other end of the world. So
yeah,
I I was
yeah.
I've always loved to be
So
there.
what was
And
the
yeah.
process like? And kind of what are the requirements? What is maybe we can kind of start to compare the requirements between those
Mhm.
visas and the process as well. We can start with the requirements. So what was different and what was similar between the two visas?
Yes, so of course, for the Australian one, they are also looking out for people who have extraordinary ability. But for them, the thing they stress more on is, yeah, they're looking for talents that people are really highly skilled, in certain sectors, and they're also looking at if you'll be able to attract a high salary. And they have like set a salary threshold. They have what they call fair threshold, which is about 162,000 Australian dollars. So, and that's how much is that in? Anyway, you can do the conversion, but that doesn't necessarily mean you have to be earning that salary. So they emphasize a lot on salary. Although salary is an evidence for the UK one, for particularly technician, like you can, if you have evidence of high salary, it's just part of the evidence. But for the Australian one, it's emphasized a lot. In fact, it's very key, and it can actually make a difference.
Mm,
Either if you have the salary, like you're currently earning the amount, or if you have an Australian employer where you have that salary equivalent, or if you can show an evidence that you can attract the salary. Yeah, so those are the either you have an Australian employer that is offering you employment with salary that is
mhm,
equivalent to that, or your current earnings in whatever country you are is equivalent to that amount, or you can evidence that you are likely to meet that criteria. So again, they're also looking for people who are internationally recognized and have outstanding achievements in the priority sector, right? And I'll talk about priority sector in a moment. So the same way maybe the UK has got the 5 endorsing bodies, one in tech, in arts, in sciences and humanities, in engineering, they have listed out 10 priority sectors. Of course, digital technology is one of them, but the other ones like now in comparison to the UK, I think they have like a broader in terms of scope that they cover of the sectors compared to the UK. UK is more narrow. So I've seen people maybe coming from education, but they cannot apply for global talent visa because they it's they can't fit into any of those categories that the UK has. So it's broader in that sense. So these are the things that I looked at. But in terms of evidence, yeah, there were similarities because on one side, the fact that had already done the UK one, and of course, have been able to prove that I'm internationally recognized and I have outstanding achievements in a sector, which is the digital technology sector. That was already like a starting point for me. But then there were some other things that they were looking for, again, for you to be eligible. They want to see, which is what one of the things that really set them apart from the UK is the fact that you would need to be nominated by either a recognized organization or someone with national reputation in your field who is a PR, permanent resident of Australia, or a citizen, or an Australian citizen, or a New Zealand citizen.
Mm.
So yeah, you need to be nominated. If you're not nominated by, and which is that's like the hurdle, key hurdle,
Yeah.
unlike the UK one where you maybe even the arts one, you just need to maybe note someone like they aren't really nominating you, or they are recommending you. But in this case, because the kind of evidence they will ask for the person to fill out their form. They're asking for some sensitive document like their passports or their PR letter. So it has to really be um, someone that can really attest for your work. More like having a guarantor, right? Yeah,
Mm.
yeah,
Hmm.
yeah,
So
yeah. So
what is involved in this? Sorry to interrupt you. What is involved in getting this endorsement from a person who is an Australian citizen or a permanent resident holder? So you said they need to fill out the form, but do they need to be somebody who worked with you, or what is your relationship with them?
they don't no, they don't even need to have worked with you. That's it. They just need to. So for example, you know how maybe in the research space, someone picks up your work and
Yeah.
and your of course your sector has to be aligned to their sector, right? They see your work, you connect with them, you network, and they find what you do really, like they see you as someone that has skill in that area, so they can endorse you for that. You know the way you endorse people on LinkedIn for a particular skill, but of course it goes a little further than that, because this person is attesting for your skill, is attesting for you to say that you deserve this visa, so they're endorsing
Mm.
you. Yeah. So the process, it can also be the way you look for recommend people who would recommend you for even the UK one. You can look for those people in a similar way, only that you'll be restricted by people who fall under this. So unlike the UK one, where maybe you can have people from US, from any other place, from any part of the world, as long as they meet certain criteria of, like, they are um, top people in their field or experts. In this case, they would also need to be, top persons in their field or very highly talented, but they would need to be Australian PR citizen or New Zealand. Yeah, so that's like the key difference, I would say. Other
Mm-hmm.
than that, most of the other evidence and process, the, it's not very far off from what you have with the UK, with the UK
Okay.
one. Yeah. So in terms of the process, again, let's talking about the stages you go through for the UK and the Australian one. They are quite similar. You have two stages, although they might not be called the same names. You have stage one and stage two. Right? Stage one is the expression of interest, which is equivalent to the UK endorsement. And then stage two is the visa application. So if you are successful in the first stage, the endorsement stage, then you are the chances of getting the visa is like similar to what you have with the UK one. So if it's 99%, then it's similar. If it's not, except other things that are outside your endorsement can hinder your success. Yes, so that is and so that stage one is where you submit your expression of interest. Whilst in submitting the expression of interest, you need to include, all the evidence about your how you internationally recognized, how you are still prominent in your field of expertise. So if you say, "Oh, I am data scientist and or senior data scientist," then you're still prominent. So you have to show that, and they will tell you typical things that they'll be looking out for. Even how your skills are going to make you an asset to Australia, which is very important. They want to see, oh yes, you have this skill, but have you thought about how you can use that within Australia? And
Mm.
even how you wouldn't have any difficulty getting employment in Australia. So you have to evidence that. And that's why they emphasize a lot on the salary, coming back to high salary, because they feel that if you're earning very high salary, then you're highly sought after, because you're an expert in your field, and therefore it's likely that you easily get a job in Australia based on your skills. So they use that high salary threshold as a benchmark. Another thing
Mm-hmm.
that makes them this, if I it was this visa that I saw, I was like, oh, PhD is really good. Outside of PhD is really a good thing, because if you have a PhD, maybe you're a recent graduate or you're finishing up with your PhD, you are your chances are boosted even if you don't have like the you don't meet the high salary threshold. Yeah. So
Mm.
if you're a recent graduate and like you've done something really, it doesn't have to be rocket science out of this world, but you've made contributions through publications, through research activities, from publications. If you have good publications, it shows that you're really adding something to the field. You're making a contribution that is significant. So if you have that, it's a plus. It's really a plus.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's one other thing that is different. I've not started talking about the pros and cons, but I would
Yeah, yeah, we
say,
can do it. We can do it in a second. Just to
mhm.
clarify for the high salary, so did I understand correctly that it's not required if you have a PhD, for instance? So it's not. Uh, I mean, proven that you will earn a lot of money in Australia is not a requirement, right?
You mean with the come again
Yeah,
with the
yeah,
question?
yeah. So basically, you just mentioned that if you have a PhD, right, then there is no expectation of you kind of being proven that you will also earn a lot of money in Australia. Is it so, or is the high salary criteria always a requirement for everybody?
Okay, so the interesting thing is in my case, right? Do I have or am I earning 162,000 Australian dollars? No. No, right? I wasn't earning that. Did I have a PhD when I applied? No. So again, comes back to they want you to prove that that you're able to attract that salary. That doesn't mean
Mm,
you need to be earning that salary. But you have to prove, if you're not earning that salary, you have to prove that you'll be able to attract that salary. Then on the PhD side, yeah, and there are people too who they I was in the process, not done, because in terms there's a way they structure their questions, right? So I was if you were close to graduation, which I was, I fall into that category. Yeah, then you can show evidence that you have made the progress, but you don't necessarily need to have like that conferral at that point. Like I'm now a graduate. I have my award letter, my PhD award
yeah.
letter. So in
Hmm.
those two cases, I would say if I would go by that, I don't even meet any of those. I'm a no for both, but there are things that you would do to show that you're able to meet those criteria.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
to follow up on that, will a usual developer with no PhD be eligible? So I guess a person who is a software engineer without any specific academic achievements, will they be able to qualify?
Well, if they can show, so without the PhD, you have to fall back on your international recognition. Again, whether you're proving that you're earning salary. So let's say someone that is earning high salary but has no evidence of international recognition might still, have a challenge with getting the visa, because the whole point is to show that you're highly skilled, you're recognized internationally. And so those things are kind of pointers to the fact that you are internationally recognized. Oh, are you earning a high salary? Oh, so that is more likely that you are doing something that is exceptional, you're highly skilled in your field. Do you have a PhD? Oh yeah, you've been making contribution to the field because you've been in the field of research. So that's like how the benchmark theirs, right? But again, comes back to how do you prove international recognition? I remember for technician, there's a high salary as evidence, and it's not the only evidence you have there. And this is
Mm-hmm.
similar to the US as well, like high salary, proving that you have high salary, because these are things they use to check and benchmark if you're internationally recognized or if you are someone with extraordinary ability, right? So
Yeah.
yeah, so to your question, you'd have to still show that you meet those criteria of highly skilled, internationally recognized, and exceptional.
So maybe you could give us a couple of ideas of how would somebody prove that they're internationally recognized? Would this be documents similar to the UK Global Talent Visa, things like awards, hackathons, letters of support, all of that stuff, or something else?
Very similar. Like for me, what even made the application process easy for me was like because of what the process I had gone through with the UK one. So I was able to use a lot of what I'd used, but I had to present it in a different way because package it in the way that sort of matches to their own format. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But then,
Mm-hmm.
for example, I didn't have to. There are things I didn't have to use for the UK one, but I had to consider them seriously and use them for the Australian one, like the salary aspects, right? Like showing that I'm going to be an asset. Although like there were questions in the UK one about like how would you contribute to the UK sector. So those things can be captured within your personal statements and your evidence, right? Alludes to that. But here in particularly, they'll be looking for those kind of statements and be looking for how you can evidence that you can attract that salary. Yeah, so those were the additional things I had to also include to address those areas. And of course,
Mm-hmm.
the um, I still use recommendation letters, right? But the one that stood out was the nomination, because that nomination is also like a recommendation. They would have to fill out the form where they're talking about you and providing some something to justify that you are exceptional and you deserve the visa. So it's still like a recommendation. The person that nominates you, what they would provide.
Yeah. This is I also wanted to ask this. Was it more difficult for you, to meet the criteria of Australian Global Talent Visa? Because I think that with the American visa, the verdict with my live stream was that it's easier to meet the British requirements for the visa than the American ones. What about this visa? What is your take?
Um, I didn't see it being more difficult to meet the criteria. I only thought the process could be um, more challenging, right? And I'm going to explain that in a bit. So let's start with the nomination. Although for both of them, you're going to have recommenders, and that process could be difficult and challenging for some people, at least. And Nadia, you know that from your experience as well. So you getting the right people to recommend you, and even there's some people you request to recommend you, and they would turn it down. Um, and for some others, they would agree to it. But the nomination, that nominator that is an Australian PR and citizen, it can be tough. But there's still a way to go around that. There are some bodies that can nominate. There is the I almost said American Australian Computer Society, and there is the Engineers Australia that can nominate, particularly for the engineering and digital tech sector. So you have those bodies that can nominate. There are organizations that are nominating bodies, but again, to go through them, it can take some time. It can be a long process because they have like a lot of backlog. So you might spend weeks waiting. So it's that whole process of putting what their requirements that's different from the UK one, which is the nominator, number one. Then the other thing is the when you submit your expression of interest, which is the stage one, the endorsement. Now that's another difficult part. On average, it could take about 12 to 14 months to
What?
yeah, 12 to 14 months to get a response. And that response could
Okay.
be, imagine waiting for 1 year and you get a no, you're not successful. Okay,
Hmm.
that is, imagine all that wait. And maybe if you have planned your career around, so it's those kind of visa, like I will just apply and move on with my life. But
Mm.
again, there is it's not all bad news, right? Because you ask yourself, how did I get that it within a short time?
Yeah.
Priority. You can get priority processing. This is becoming, I hope it's not too complex for people.
So you mean you can pay extra so that they
No,
can
no,
do it
no. You
faster?
don't pay extra. So priority processing is like if you there's certain things they will look at in a candidate and they will prioritize. So you're in on a queue with a lot of people that have been waiting for 12 months and more, and then you just apply and they see certain things in your application and they move you to the front of the queue and you get your decision in a few weeks.
Huh.
I don't
Okay.
understand their system, to be honest. So, but now that was like I was able to, like, I was privileged to get priority processing. And what are they looking out for in priority processing? They're looking out for, are you does your profile meet the priority sectors that they have? So those 10 priority sectors they call ministerial sectors because that's like a priority for them. They want to attract talent in those sectors, right? And another thing they're looking at is, have you been able to show that you're going to attract this like high salary? And are you internationally recognized? So they look at those factors and they decide on priority processing. Previously, and this is just a recent change because I'm going to talk about recent changes that have also happened. Previously, you could go through your region. For example, like Europe region, you have like global talent officers, and they would do that initial assessment of your profile and kind of recommend you for priority processing. But guess what? Just a few weeks ago, and I shared that update, or very recently, they have scrapped that process. So it means that there is no, you can't go through those global talent officers. But that doesn't mean that priority processing would still not happen. It's just that it wouldn't be through that process. And they even mentioned that you could, if you just want to do stage two, just like apply for stage two directly and just pay and apply for stage two without doing stage one. You could do that. But of course, if you get rejected, that's your cut. And remember, stage one, again, one difference between Australian UK, stage one, you don't pay a dime.
Hmm.
You don't pay
Mm-hmm.
a dime, right? For the UK one, you have to pay, and it's connected to the visa application, like home office. So if you're unsuccessful, it's like it's already like a home office application because stage one and stage two are all linked. But with Australian one, the expression of interest, that's stage one, you don't pay and it has nothing to do, is dissociated from your visa application. So you could apply as many times as possible, until you get it. And once you have it, you can apply for a visa, which is a separate process where you begin to pay. And to, again, another surprising fact is that first time I applied, I was unsuccessful.
Okay.
Yeah, I was unsuccessful
When
first time
when was it?
for the
When was
stage
it?
one.
Was it before Global Talent for the UK or after?
No, after.
After.
Yeah, because a lot of like these applications is how you present. Like if you don't again don't the fact that you are successful in one might not necessarily make you successful in the other if you don't present your evidence in a way that meets those criteria. So I think I want under the assumption that, oh, okay, um, since I got the UK, this one's going to be easy. I took certain things for granted. But then the second time, I had to spend more time In fact, I'd already said, oh no, I'm not going to, I will not bother. I will not bother about this again. But um, after lots of encouragement from my husband, and because he too, like, he was also led, like, on the spiritual side, like, we need to do this, because look at what God is showing us, look at the dreams I've had, and I remember the ones I've had too about Australia. And we're like, okay, let's give it another shot. If not, I would probably just say, oh no, let's leave it. Yeah, and that was how we tried the second time, and it came, it worked out,
Mm.
it was successful. Yes. So yeah, that's the whole pros and cons. Now they have scrapped the priority processing, like that whole process you go through to get priority processing, but that still doesn't mean you can get priority processing internally if you meet certain criteria. And now they're saying that from their recent updates, you could just keep the stage one and just pay for stage two. But I think that is risky, because if you get stage one, you are almost certain to get your visa, except maybe you don't meet certain things like the medical. Because remember, this is a permanent resident visa. Again, that's another difference. The UK one is just a visa that, yeah, it can lead you to permanent residency, but the Australian one, you already, like, you get the visa, you become a permanent resident of Australia. So you
Mm,
can
mhm.
understand and appreciate the difference, and that means every privilege that um, and a permanent resident will have from the one, you can begin to have those privileges, right? So, and we after,
That's amazing, actually. Yeah, I think that's a big
yeah,
advantage of the visa.
yeah, yeah, exactly. Yes. So that's the stage two is the, like, the actual visa application that gives you that permanent residency. So those are like the differences and contrasts. And then again, there is another difference, is there's a quota. The global talent Australia started off with, I think it was 15,000, and then they halved it to about 8,000, and I'm hearing now that it's 5,000. Right? So it means that, again, it's a very new visa. It just started off in 2020, unlike the UK one that I think it's been there since like 2011 before it was rebranded. It was tier one, though then it had quota. Started off with like 1,000
Yeah,
visas per year. Before they now made it unlimited, so there's no quota attached to it now. But
yeah,
that's to kind of show you that the Australian one at this stage is a pilot. So, and that's why we even, I was grateful that we went all out for it, and because we don't know what's going to happen maybe next year. And
yeah,
if it's a pilot, then they would be reviewing a lot of things. They'll be checking. So, for example, previously they were having onshore applicants up to 70%. Onshore are, like, that's the word they use for, like, people that are already resident in Australia, and the visa, they saw 70% are people that are already in Australia, but they have like so many other different routes and pathways for them. And because of that, they now prioritized offshore. So if you're an onshore, you're likely not to get this visa, because the whole point is to attract talent from all over the globe. But you have people who are already very Australian applying and just taking advantage of the routes. So, and they had to make those adjustments. So, well, the whole point is it's quite new. It's a pilot, so anything that is being done, one has to, like, go, if you're interested in it, go all out for it and just secure it to start with, because it's really
yeah,
good. Like, you get your PR straight off, and then, yeah, you can think of
mhm,
settlement. Another thing is, for the UK one, you that stage one endorsement, I think you have a few months to then apply for the stage two. Was it three
yeah.
months you have?
3 months, yeah,
Yeah. And then when you get it, you have 3 months to move into the UK. Right. But with Australian one, if you get the stage one, you have 1 year to apply for stage two. And if you get stage two, you have 1 year to enter into Australia. So it kind of gives you more time to, like, plan.
yeah,
Anyway, yeah, if you think of it, it's like it's since it's a PR visa, you have to be considering I'm relocating with my family, and I have to really plan for all
Yeah.
of that. Yeah. So
Yeah. But in terms of timeline, so you said that you have a year to apply for the PR and then a year to enter, but it means that you have to move there and relocate to Australia. And if you don't, then does your PR get revoked, or what happens to it? Do
no,
you
it
know?
doesn't. It doesn't get revoked. It's just like just like activating. So you have a year to enter, and within that year, so more like activating it. Like
Hmm.
you have to touch base, and if you spend even one day there, and of course, like you have to meet some residency requirements in the long run, but at least that one shows that, oh yeah, I've kind of like established my presence here, and
Yeah.
then you can sort out the residency aspect later.
So, so I guess for if you want to apply for the Australian passport in the future, you need to relocate there, right?
Yeah, yeah,
Eventually.
yeah. There
Yeah.
are residency um requirements to meet to get the citizenship, of course.
Yeah. And how long will it take, for instance, for somebody who gets this visa to get the passport in Australia, more or less?
So you can apply after 4 years of residency. You can apply for citizenship,
It's
which is
very
like,
quick, actually.
yeah,
Yeah.
if you think of the UK one, if you go on the talent route for technician, it's like after 5 years, right? Then
Yeah.
6 years on the promise path to
Hmm.
citizenship. So
Yeah, so it's much faster actually. Yeah, that's very interesting. And what do you think kind of is the what is the motivation for people? You said that a lot of the people, most of the people who applied for this visa were actually onshore, so they were already in Australia. Were they applying because their current visas didn't have a path to the permanent residency, or was it some other reason? Like what is this visa also like the best visa that there is in Australia?
yeah, because if you think of even the UK one, where there are certain, even in the application process, like the time it takes is shorter. And you could, so for them, one motivation is for other visas, like some of them are like skilled worker kind of visa, you would need to meet certain English requirements. But for this one, is you just need functional English, right? So those kind of things motivate people to like, oh, um, this is easier because I just need functional English. I just even need like in our case, it was just a matter of, okay, I've studied in the UK, and I can show that I've studied in English, and that was even sufficient. Kind of like have um, something that shows that you've studied in these countries or you've done your research in an English speaking country. So that can meet functional requirements as against having to pass or get a particular score in like English, which is difficult for some people. Yeah, so
Mm,
and some other things like the timeline as well. Some others can be longer. So even though this one is can be quite long for some people, for some it's faster. Like, but if you check the average time, like it's more like maybe 6 months on average, but some persons it can take really up to 1 year. They're still waiting. And some persons it's faster. And if you're prioritized, it can take like a few weeks. But remember, no more priority processing through the global talent officers, but that doesn't mean
yeah.
that they can do it quickly if you have all the qualifications.
Yeah, yeah, amazing. I think that I certainly learned a lot about the Australian route. So in terms of, if you compare them, if somebody is listening to this and they're still unsure which route to take in terms of, we can kind of compare the countries, obviously, but in terms of visas, if somebody is like torn between the UK and Australia, they like both countries, maybe they have connections in both countries and they are just not sure. They kind of want to move somewhere where they will have a better visa situation, sort of. So, which one would you recommend? I kind of guess I can guess which one in terms of like legal status and things like that, or other factors maybe they should consider.
Yeah, so if I look at the pros and cons, if you're looking for maybe if you're just open to UK or Australia and you're thinking of where can I like immediately start enjoying privileges of permanent residence, which is not very far-fetched from a citizen, then Australia would be like your go-to visa, because you're going to be getting straight PR, and you start enjoying those privileges from day one of getting the visa. And
Yeah.
then after 4 years, you can apply for your citizenship. Um, Again, if also you want to like have a longer time to plan for relocation, settlement, and have that flexibility, then you can also think of Australia because of like the time, how relaxed they are with like the time to enter, and the flexibility they have. Again, if you want to, you lose nothing applying, expressing interest, right? You lose nothing except maybe you're getting some coaching to help, which is advisable, but there's no fee attached to it, just like the except again if you are also getting nomination from an organization. But if all of that is sorted out, you can just apply. The only thing is the waiting time, which also depends on how strong your profile is. How long you will wait depends on your profile as well. So if you have a very
Mm-hmm.
strong profile, you're more likely to get it quicker, and like if you meet all the criteria. Yeah, and the fact that the expression of interest is actually detached from the visa application, so we kind of are not bothered about what's going to happen if I get rejected, and because this is connected to the immigration office and so on. Yeah, and again, depending on your sector, for certain sectors, you would not even get a place in the UK pool, talent pool there, because those sectors are not covered. So let's say someone from education or some other sector. So if those your sector falls under Australia, then Australia is actually like your only bet, because you don't have even the option of going to or considering the UK.
Mm-hmm.
Um, yeah, and the cost as well. Like I think
Yeah.
relatively, apart from the time cost, but you have to consider cost from different angles. But I think the Australian one works out cheaper in cost, because the UK, remember, this is like a visa that leads you to permanent residency, which you're going to be applying for 5 or 6 years down the line. But with this one, you can actually bear all that costs, which is relatively like about the cost of getting the UK ILR for one person. And yeah, it works out cheaper because you don't have to like do any other, let's say if you have like a family and you have to like bear all the cost of paying for your family eventually when you start doing ILR, and then you can just have that peace of mind that you're all settled in. Yeah, so that's, I think,
Mm-hmm.
from the things I've said, that's like if things to consider if you're that might be in favor of Australia. But coming to the UK, if you're thinking of the time, getting quick, very quick updates or very quick decision, then UK might be what you'll be looking at, because you might not be able to bear all that wait time, except you have like, oh, I'm just going to throw in this application, and whenever I get a decision, I have like a plan A, and this
Mm-hmm.
is maybe plan B. Um,
Yeah.
then other issue with even the application process is, for the UK one, at least you get feedback. At least like the technician visa, you're going to get feedback from the assessors, and the first feedback you get is like if you're unsuccessful, you get feedback. If you even if you appeal, you also get feedback, because another person will be looking at it. But for Australia, guess what? No feedback. Like if you're unsuccessful, they will just give you generic template like response, and
Oh
you
no.
wouldn't really know where the problem is coming from. What part of your application did you not do well? They will just It's just going to be generic. Yeah. And for UK as well, I think one plus is the fact that there is unlimited quota, right? Like we said earlier, they removed the cap. It used to be from 1,000 to 2,000, but now no cap. Right? So you're not bothered about, oh, there I'm going to be, it's like very competitive because they only have to give 5,000 people visas, and you know I don't know if I'm going to qualify. and the fact that also the UK one has been around for a while, so you might not have those fears of it's going to be ending anytime soon. Who knows anyway? Like no one knows. No one knows what the government will be up to, right? So, but again, that might even be a reason to even think of the Australian one, getting into it as quickly as possible, because the fact that it's a pilot, the earlier you, if you're considering it, the earlier you get started, maybe the better, right?
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah, and also, yeah, just to say that if people kind of need help with getting coached on the process of getting the stage one application for the Australian visa, they can reach out to you as well. I guess LinkedIn is a good place to be in touch.
yeah,
If this is a kind of, it does sound like a process where I think having a coach will really help. Is there enough, in your experience, is there enough information about the Australian visa online? Can somebody like easily research it and apply on their own, or is it still relatively mysterious?
yeah. I think the fact that it's quite early stage, 2020, um, v- visa launched in 2020, as opposed to UK that is has been there even longer, makes a lot of the process quite really difficult to understand. But for me, maybe the experience of navigating the UK one gave me more confidence, because
Mm-hmm.
I've been through that process, even though it's not the same, but some of those techniques I use, strategy, and all that was quite similar. Yeah, but in terms of support, sure, UK, the fact that it's had more persons over these years, and there are lots more out there about it, kind of makes it easier. But yeah, there's still some um, spaces online that you could, like, there's on Facebook and on Discord, those kind of spaces you would find communities that are talking about their experience applying for the visa.
Mm-hmm. But in the case of Australian visa, would you say that somebody, can apply on their own? Quite, once they get the information, is it process where that person can handle on their own? I'm asking because I talked to somebody who got the O1 visa in the States, and they were pretty convinced that it's better to apply with a lawyer. And in the UK version of the visa, it's actually not a requirement to have a lawyer. So, do you feel that the Australian visa is closer to the UK one in this respect?
Yeah, like I think it's closer. It's in terms of their requirements, it's not as spelled out as and I know even the UK one, there's some areas that are quite gray areas that people keep getting confused about, right? But it's not as like very fleshed out as the UK one. But there's also that possibility of going about it, trying it on your own
Hmm.
as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, so for
Hmm.
sure it's possible. And remember, there are actually two stages. There's stage one, there's stage two. So maybe stage two is where one can defer to a
Yeah.
lawyer to
Hmm.
help. But yeah, even for that one, like it could also be done. You could also do that on your own if you feel
Hmm.
confident about it.
Yeah. Yeah, that's actually, I think, inspiring, and also the fact that it's free to apply for the first stage. I think it's also quite cool. So, just might be worth thinking about it. Also, let's answer one question. I think we don't have more questions coming up, and also I think we are like really beyond the time that we were planning to. Although we didn't like plan any specific timeline. But there was a question about that actually is interesting for me as well. So, how to find a nominee who is of Australian descent? Because this is a requirement. So, yeah, I was also thinking of myself like, how would I find somebody like that who would endorse me for this visa if I decided to do this? Any tips on that?
Okay, interesting. So, and people have different experiences with this. Um, like I said, the way, if you have clearly nobody to go to, no one comes to mind, because I mean, Australia is the other part of the world, and you can't really find anyone. There are organizations that you can look to, and some of those organizations you have to pay to submit. So that's where the money starts coming in, right? The end
Mm.
EOI, expression of interest, is free, but if you want to go through an organization because you don't have anyone to endorse you, there is the cost of the actual money and the time it might take you to wait to get a decision from them, right? And then you can take that decision for your application for the
Mm-hmm.
actual stage one. Yes, so that is that is at least an option. But again, the limitation for that is that it's not every sector that those organizations cover. So there is
Mm-hmm.
the Australian Computer Society, which is for clearly for those in tech, right? Digital tech or digitech as it's called. There is the Engineers Australia for those in energy infrastructure sector. Yes, so those those ones are kind of covered. But maybe if you're in education, I'm not aware of anybody that can endorse. Yes, so but that said, for for in my case, I'd say maybe mine was a bit unique because I tried to reach out to my contacts that I already knew. Remember, I mentioned that I had a plan back then to go to Australia, but it's yeah, I didn't get any make any headway. But mine is like direction I got to. I particularly, based on what I received as a direction, it was to the key there is making sure key thing there is making sure that you're getting someone that is in your sector, right? Someone that is in a similar sector as you, because some people might be hesitant. There's some people I reached out to and they were hesitant because they maybe the way I presented myself to them or what they interpreted by my profile um, was that the sectors did not match, right? So if maybe someone sees IoT and they are in AI, they might think I'm just doing IoT, but they wouldn't understand that I'm deploying machine learning algorithms on Internet of Things devices. So I'm also in AI. In fact, I'm dominantly in the AI
Mm-hmm.
space. Yeah, so it's how you present yourself and making sure you get people that match with your sector. So, but in a similar way to how you can also even look out for people to recommend you for the UK one, although this one will be more limited because you also only have to look for people in that in that like small niche of Australian PR, Australian and descent. Yeah, but you can keep like reaching out, networking, and that's like the first hurdle you have to cross because without a nominator, you're not making any headway with that application.
Yeah. But I think what makes it easy is that you don't have to work with this person for any period of time. So I think this is easier. So at least it's not easy, but I think it's doable for people who are ready to work on their network or maybe go through the organizations that you mentioned. Um, okay. I think that I asked most of the questions that I wanted to ask about the visa programs. I think we compared them quite well. To me, at least, it's clear kind of what the process is and what it looks like. And I definitely learned a lot. And I think people who watching this learned a lot as well. Would you like to share any kind of parting thoughts or tips or any kind of wisdom that you would like to share with people who are thinking about moving somewhere that is not their home? Anything just to inspire us towards the end?
Yeah, sure. I don't know if there were some other questions that someone asked about from what figure is your salary considered high in the UK? I don't think the
Yeah,
UK has
this one.
any salary threshold, but if you were to like use the Australian benchmark, it would be converting to like a 90, is it 92 or 90 something thousand pounds. But then, like we said, you don't have to. I didn't meet that threshold by my current salary, but I was able to show like that I would have that ability to meet the threshold. Yeah. So
Hmm.
that's something to note. Then in terms of like final words, I think one of the things alluding to what we said earlier about the application process is for me from my journey. When I started out, I didn't consider myself even like fit for some of the requirements I saw there, right? But it took looking closely, and this is where like getting help, getting support can make a difference. Because um, one thing is like looking out for who are the people that maybe are similar to have a similar profile and kind of drawing inspiration, but don't think that you have to match yourself completely to someone because you are unique and your uniqueness has to come out in your application and you have to like convey that in your application. And for me as well, from my experience, many of the things that I was doing just as either a hobby, passion, or just like meeting my career goals came in handy. Right? So you might feel that I don't even have anything, but you'll be surprised that if you can try to like dig further, you'd see that you've actually done a lot that you give yourself credit for, right? And if you also think of it as a process, like profiling yourself, when like you're doing like a strategy, you're looking at assist and to be, for example, where am I and where do I want to get to? And you're doing that profiling. It's to me, it's like that exercise, bringing everything together in one space about yourself, right? And communicating and conveying that, which is also important. Like if this is what we do in different ways. We attend interviews, we talk about ourselves, we you know, talk about our skills in different ways. So if you think of it as that kind of exercise, you even find it like, let me use the word Nadia use, fun, right? Because you're
Mhm.
considering it as an exercise that you're doing. And it would also help you map where you want to get to. What are the elements that are missing, which you think, oh, this is going to be important for me to add to my portfolio maybe in the future. Yeah, so it's always doable. And if you have doubts, good to speak to Nadia. She's doing a great job and in that space of coaching and myself as well. So good to like hit us
Yeah,
up and
thanks so much.
have a chat.
Yeah, I agree. I think that agree with everything that you said. I think that it's so important sometimes to talk to somebody who's not you. Like it doesn't have to be any of us. It can be a friend, it can be a volunteer, or anybody who understands the topic better, but also who understands your experience and who can just give you. That's why I said a friend who's not a specialist. Even I think that can be helpful as well, just to maybe help you see the parts of your life experience, your work experience that are relevant and that are just maybe not exceptional, but are interesting. I think this is where it starts. You look into your experience, you come up with the things that might be interesting, and then it kind of starts from there because until you learn to see the more unusual things in your background, your career, your academic background, it will be very difficult, I think, for you to start the process. But it all starts with kind of the first step. I think getting informed and educated on this, seeing what's possible, looking at the free information online. Again, I will post my YouTube because there is already a huge library of information there, interviews with people who have been endorsed for the visa. I think that this is something where you can start and listen to their stories. I personally get very inspired by stories of people who have done something that I want to do in the future. So this might be useful. And also, if you are just joining this later, the whole 2 hours of it will be recorded on YouTube. So make sure to subscribe to check it out. It will be ready for replay immediately after this ends. So I think it's already kind of you can watch it already. So yeah, make sure to catch up on the content. I think this was a truly unique live stream because I haven't really seen these two visa programs compared kind of side by side. And this is such a unique opportunity to talk to somebody who actually went through the process and done all of this. So thank you so much for your time, Maryleen. Thank you so much for sharing your story with us. It's just been such a joy to talk to you and learn from you. And I hope that
Thanks for
people
having me.
like this show as well.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Nadia. Really, really a pleasure to have a chat
Yeah.
and really talk about this.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Yeah. Thank you for your time. Thanks for everybody who was watching
Yeah,
it.
thanks everyone.
Um, Yeah, thanks for your time. Thanks for spending the time with us. And there are ways all the ways to get in touch with us are in the description box. So if you're interested, you can follow along, get in touch, follow the content, and just stay connected. Thank you, everybody, and have a nice rest of your day. Bye.
Bye.